Welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman, a podcast loaded with practical tips, powerful scripts, personal stories, and simple steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. So get ready to get the information you need to make the impact you want from someone you trust, your friend, parenting expert, Dr. Robyn Silverman.
Hello and welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything, where we give you the tips, scripts, stories, and steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. I'm thrilled to be your host, Dr. Robyn Silverman, child and teen development specialist, author, and speaker, and most importantly, parent of two amazing children who give me the opportunity to love, learn, and grow every single day, whether I want to or not. Believe me, I get it. It's not always easy. But we are in this together, and thankfully, we have a lot of really wonderful people we can call on to get the help and insight we need. Now, as you know, I'm always on the hunt looking for the best experts in their field to help us navigate how to talk to kids about all different topics. And today, we have an awesome guest who I know you're going to love. Jessica Lahey is a current teacher, a writer, and a mom who writes about education, parenting, and child welfare for The Atlantic, something I read often, Vermont Public Radio, and the New York Times, and is the author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Gift of Failure: How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go so Their Children Can Succeed. She lives in New Hampshire with her husband and two sons and teaches high school English and writing in Vermont. And you can find out all about her and her amazing work on jessicalahey.com. And she also has a podcast, which I hope she'll talk about later. Now, Jessica's topic of the gift of failure is something that can apply to every age group, young children, preteens, teens, young adults. But remember, while you may not be in the weeds with this particular topic right now, you will likely need to talk to your children about failure, self-reliance, resilience at some point. Or if you have moments when you feel like this is happening right now, you're going to be using everything she says. And know that it's never one big talk. It's a series of little talks. So this podcast can help provide you with some tips and some scripts to help you the next time that this falls into your lap. And you know there will be a next time. Parenting always provides the opportunities. So now is the time. Please kindly put away all your possible distractions, if possible. If you're driving, of course you can't. And let's make this your time, or as we might call, mine o'clock. Let's make the most of it and turn our attention to today's guest of honor, who has taken time out of her busy schedule to hang out, inspire us, and give us some concrete tools that we will take away and use right away, or when we're in need. The incredibly insightful Jessica Lahey. Thank you so much for joining us on How to Talk to Kids About Anything.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, I'm thrilled. I really am. I've been reading your book. I've been so excited about it. I've been using it myself because there's so many great tidbits in there. Great tips, great scripts. I love the way that you write so accessibly, and I feel like you're talking to me. Sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, I feel like I've been doing this. So, let's get right on into it.
Well, it sounds like such a cliche, but I mean, honestly, I really did just write the book I needed. The
Yes.
book I couldn't find out there that I needed for myself.
Yes.
So I guess in sort of a way I was, sort of reminding myself of what I needed to sort of turn this over-parenting ship around.
Yes. I mean, you're so honest and you're so accessible in the book, where you're talking about things that have happened to you, mistakes you've made, how you've turned it around. And I think that that's what people want. They want a real human who is writing about them, to them, and has been in the trenches with them.
Well, I think between parenting and teaching, there are a lot of mistakes to be made, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I think the ability to learn from them is all. And what was really weird, though, is that I think I was doing that in my classroom for longer than I was doing that at home. I joke that there was some sort of like disconnect between my teacher brain and my parent brain. So while at school, I would have these conversations with my students about the things I had said wrong, or that were mistakes that were made, or apologies I needed to make to them. And at school, I was talking to them about their goals and trying to tone down talk about their grades. And yet at home, I wasn't doing that. I was doing like the exact opposite. I don't know what my problem was, but essentially it was getting that sort of analytical side where I took all the research and about learning, and I knew what worked as a teacher, and getting it to talk to my parent brain. So that was really the conversation I had in my own head when I was writing all of this stuff. So
I love that. I love that. I think that it's very easy as a professional, for me as a child development specialist, we can absolutely give incredible advice to everyone else. But when we are in the mix ourselves, we don't take our own advice. And I often have like this little voice inside my head, like, that was the best you could do? Like, really? Well done. So before we get into the meat of the matter, for those of you who haven't had the opportunity and the pleasure to meet you, read your books, or listen to you speak, would you just take a moment to tell us what gets you up in the morning? What do you think about before you go to sleep at night? Like, really, what are you passionate about?
Well, it's funny, when I first started, I've always been a writer, number one, and I actually never intended to be a teacher. I went, excuse me, you've caught us during the flu week,
I'm
and
so sorry.
all the parents out there know, it's a matter of time. My
Yes.
my kid's home today with the
Yep.
barfy fever
Yes,
thing. So
it's awesome.
we're just going to make it through
We're
today.
going to make
I'm
it
in the
work. This
weeds.
was me last week,
Exactly.
so I get it. I get it.
So, I actually went to law school to be a juvenile attorney, and I was positive that's what I was going to be, in the way that we're, always positive in our 20s of exactly what we're going to do with our lives. And I was asked to teach a class, and I started teaching, and that was that. I knew teaching was it for me. And so when I was sort of at a loss as to what to write about, my husband said, why don't you write about teaching? And I looked at him and I said, no one wants to read about that. Really, who's going to read that? I was so happy to be proven very, very wrong. Teachers are just voracious readers of content about how to be better teachers. You would be shocked at the number of teachers who are just saying, give me stuff. I want to be better. I want to be a better teacher. So, I don't tend to write a lot about ed policy. I tend to write a lot about what it means to be a good teacher. And as those of us who have taught know, that does spill over into our parenting. And so that's really thinking about helping kids learn, thinking about, especially now that I teach kids at sort of risk of catastrophic failure. I teach drug and alcohol addicted kids right now, how to help those kids want to learn, how to help those kids understand that they are important and relevant in the world, and that the things they're learning can be important and relevant in the world. I think that's the big disconnect, is we tend to think of parenting and teaching as something that we do ourselves, as opposed to understanding that we can only be successful at that if we're helping children, whether they're our own children or whether they're our students, understand that they have this sense of self-efficacy, that they have agency, that they can go out into the world and they can actually be effective and effectual in the world. And if we're not doing that, then we're just going wah 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 wah, like the parents. That's the stuff we do for ourselves to make us ourselves feel good as teachers and parents isn't often the stuff that helps kids, and helping people understand that in a gentle way that doesn't make people feel defensive. That's sort of what I'm always thinking about, because I'm a very defensive person. And if someone comes at me and says, this is why you're teaching wrong, and this is how you're teaching wrong, and this is how you're parenting wrong, I'm not going to hear that. But there is stuff that I need to hear. So how to do that without, while making people understand that this is all a process of becoming better parents and teachers, then, that's what keeps me up.
It sounds like you really highlight the strengths in your students, and at the same time can uncover their challenges and make them feel like they are able to conquer them, that they have what it takes to move forward in their lives without needing to rely on everyone else to do it for them.
That lesson came out of a student. I think that I think I knew that in the abstract, but knowing that as something that actually is something that occurs to me on a daily basis came from a student. There was a student, we all have them, these students that when they walk in the classroom, we go, oh God, there's that kid again. That kid that drives me nuts. That kid that makes my life difficult. And I realized that I had so distanced myself from this kid, and he had so distanced himself from me, and we were so adversarial that the only way that that was going to change is if I fixed it. And the only way that I could fix it was to be able to find something good in him. And believe me, that was a struggle for me. And I worked really, really hard. I practically followed this kid around, just waiting for him to do something that I could really
show me something good.
Well, it can't be empty praise. It can't be, oh, you worked so hard on that, blah, 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 A for effort. It has to be something real, because they're completely on to us if it's not something real. And that moment changed our entire relationship. I finally was able to find that one thing that was a real and true strength of his. And you know, teaching from strengths is not something I'm making up. I mean, there's an entire book called Strengths-Based Parenting that is fantastic. And that's sort of what kids need from us. And that is definitely not to say that I don't give constructive feedback when constructive feedback is needed. I'm actually really known for being a very honest and very straightforward sort of criticism giver. But kids need to know that they're worth something, and especially kids who don't hear that very often.
So just out of curiosity, what was it? What was his strength?
You know, there was an assignment that was really, really hard for him that he didn't want to admit that was really hard for him. And normally his MO was to just give up and blame it on someone else, or just not do it. And he gave it a shot in a way that I could tell was genuine. And I sat down with him and I said, we talked about the fact that I knew that this was hard for him, and I knew that he didn't want to do it because he didn't want me to see him fail at it, and he didn't want his parents to see him fail at it. And he started to cry, and that was he had never. And I taught middle school at the time, and boys in middle school in particular. It was fairly common for a boy in particular to stand up and turn his back to me as his teacher because he didn't want to see me cry. He didn't want me to see him cry. And he cried, and he thanked me in the way that he could at that time. But it was just noticing that he had given his all at a moment that was really hard for him.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I imagine that he'll remember that and take that with him.
I hope so, because we've had, after that, there was plenty of other, negative stuff. But it was cushioned by that one little tiny bonding moment where we were able to establish something real. So even the subsequent bad stuff, there was still that good moment there to sort of underpin all of that and cushion some of that.
I just want to underscore that, because it seems like parents then, when they're at odds with their child, if they can dig in and look for the strength in that moment or out of that moment, that can carry them, carry with them, and that can help temper the frustration that we often feel when we're butting heads with our child.
Well, and I think that, Gift of Failure is really what Gift of Failure is as a book. It's about fostering intrinsic motivation in kids, getting kids to try to want to do something for the sake of the thing itself. And intrinsic motivation really comes down to three things, and that's fostering kids' autonomy, which is like independence but a little different. It really is about giving them the details, control over the details, and helping them feel competent. Which is a little bit about that sort of helping them feel strong and not confident, because that's pretty empty. But competent is sort of confidence based on experience. But the third leg of that chair, of that stool, is connection and our connection with them. And the one thing I know is that when I'm nagging and overparenting and trying to control everything, what I do is I create this really toxic nagging environment in our home, and it undermines my relationship with my kids. So, the amazing thing about having written this book, and the thing that's just incredible to me, is that it's sort of out there in the world, and people are send me letters about it. But the letters that I get that are the most important to me are the ones that say, this has changed my relationship with my child. And we have more time to talk about the stuff we want to talk about and to bond over the stuff we feel positive about. And we don't spend as much time harping over these stupid little nagging things. That's that connection end of it. I'm glad when kids do better in school. I'm glad when kids, can listen and blah, blah, blah. But when it comes to the relationship stuff, when someone tells me that it's improved their relationship with their children, that's the ball game for me.
That's beautiful. Why do you think that parents don't want their children to fail and make mistakes? I mean, what reasons do parents give that to step in and take over while they're struggling and trying to figure out a task? What is that about? What's going on?
There's a whole chapter in the book about sort of how we got here, but I think it comes down to we're having kids later, we're having fewer kids, we're having kids after more education and more time out in the workforce. And then we bring those tools, the tools we tend to use in the workforce and in our education, like spreadsheets and our need for this constant feedback on our progress. We bring that to parenting and we put that on our poor kids' shoulders. And we tend to measure ourselves as parents like lacking any feedback. We don't get progress reports on our parenting. So lacking that, we tend to look at our kids and we tend to say, oh, okay, well, if my kid is getting all A's and my kid is on the traveling soccer league, then I must be doing great as a parent. And one of the things I talk a lot about is that not only is that unfair to kids, it's false. It's empty. It's not the fact that our kids aren't reflections of us. Our kids are their own people. And to put that on them is really unfair. But the other issue is that I think we tend to, in my speaking engagements, I talk about the fact that every single night before I go to bed, there's this box. I'm a huge checklist fan. And there's this box I always need to check off. And it's the most important one. And that is, was I a good parent today? And the things that I do to be able to check that box off, the ways that it's easy to check that box off are those moments where I feel good. I get that warm, fuzzy feeling in my belly because I rescued my kid from having to stay in from recess, or I rescued my kid from someone teasing him because he forgot all of his stuff again. Those moments make me feel really good, but they do not teach him a whole heck of a lot.
Right.
So I think as parents, we need to step back and stop looking to those moments that make us feel good as evidence of our own good parenting, because they're not. They're evidence of us making ourselves feel good, not necessarily evidence of helping our kids feel good about themselves.
And that's a great, wise thing to realize, and probably extremely hard, considering our society is
I still struggle with it all the time.
So pressure filled. And my friend Kathleen Hassan, sometimes I remember her saying, everything needs to be bigger, better, faster, more.
Right.
And I think that is the philosophy that we use as parents often, where we're, if I could let me just tie your shoe for you.
Right. Because it's a tangible thing.
Yes.
We look for those tangible moments where we're like, yes, I did this today for my kid. My kid knew I had his back today. Yes. As opposed to looking more long term and saying, am I helping my kid grow as a human being over the long term? Because, as you well know, things don't improve for our kids on a day-to-day basis. Our kids are not like better, stronger people than they were yesterday, but hopefully over the course of a year, they've improved and they've gotten to some higher level of learning and competence and all that kind of stuff. And it's hard to check that box off every day if that's, if that's sort of our goal.
Oh, what an important thing. And then we have to shift to checking off that box when we feel like our kid has done something perhaps on their own, been a little bit more self-reliant, been a little bit more competent, as you were talking about. I love that, that idea of being confident through experience. I love the way you define that.
And I tell a story in the book about my kid leaving his homework on the coffee table. And, the fact that I had to be at the school in an hour anyway, and I knew I couldn't take that homework. And it made me feel like a terrible person. Yes. It made me feel horrible because I felt ineffectual and I felt like a lame duck mom. But in the end, what that resulted in was a checklist that he has used every day before school for 4 years to remember his homework, to remember to brush his teeth, to remember to do all these things. That checklist is on our refrigerator, and that's the success. That for me, it may be that I didn't get to check that box off that day, but boy, every time I see him looking at that checklist in the morning and it's the thing that keeps him from forgetting something, that's where I say, oh yes, that was the day I didn't take the homework. his teacher, he and his teacher had a conversation about strategies, and this is the result. I mean, that's looking at him over a long period of time. My getting to check that box off every day is not what's going to help him be a better, more competent human being.
It was so beautiful, and I felt the struggle when I read the story, because my kids are 6 and 7, and I just I've totally been the parent that has brought the homework in. I've been the parent that
we all have
brought the gloves in. I absolutely did that, and I felt it, and there was one time when my daughter left her homework at home and I didn't bring it in, and she came back home and she said, "Oh yeah, I talked to my teacher. She said, no, it's okay. Just be more responsible and bring it back tomorrow." And I was like, can you believe that was it? And I sat there and struggled with that during the day. Should I have brought that in?
We're so clearly, it's so clearly a problem that there are schools right now that have decided to create a blanket rule for the entire school that no one is allowed to bring any forgotten items after first bell. And the nice thing about that rule is because the school is clearly making a statement that part of our responsibility is not just teaching math and science, but to teach your kids how to come up with strategies to remember their stuff and to become more responsible human beings. But the nice thing is then the kid can't get mad at the parent for not doing it, because it's not the parent's rule, it's the school's rule. And the schools that have done this, I've talked to a few of them, have reported that it actually has resulted in a whole bunch of great positive effects that parents report back on, because kids have to come up with their own strategies. And if it's a school-wide policy, it really speaks to the fact that this is a crisis. We need to stop doing this. And schools are finally stepping in and saying, enough. This has gotten way out of hand. And the thing I love about it is it's fair. Because if you think about from a socioeconomic perspective, who has the ability to return things to school? It's parents that don't rely on public transportation. It's parents that aren't doing shift work, that kind of thing. I was at a very wealthy school recently, and the teachers laughed and they said, "Oh, it's the nannies that bring the things."
Okay. Yes. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't think we often think about that piece, that it would be unfair, given that kind of circumstance. But I think it's what you're saying is really important. And perhaps, if a parent is not in that situation and, they could feasibly bring in a homework assignment, maybe they can connect with the teacher and say, I was wondering if you might have a policy that says something about not bringing homework in and rescuing our children. I have no doubt the teacher would say, yes, absolutely, I love that policy. And then you just say to your child, your teacher doesn't like it when we do that, so we're not going to do that.
There was one time I did an in-between thing. My son was about to have a big exam, and there was a sort of a review assignment he had, and he left it at home. This was I can't even remember which kid it was. And I scanned it and sent the email to the teacher. And I said, do not give my child credit for this assignment. If but there's information here. I understand that as a teacher, you need to know where my kid is. And so, since you don't have this assignment, you won't have that information. So do not give my kid this assignment. Do not give my kid credit for having brought it into school, but this is just for your knowledge. So that was a nice sort of in between. And it said to the teacher, look, we're in this together, and I support you as the teacher in giving my child penalties for things that he's not remembering on his own.
I'm sure they appreciate that.
As a teacher, I can tell you right now, we really appreciate
really appreciate that. Yes. Yeah. So I want to get into the real thick of it. In your book, you are masterful at bringing to light the importance of putting the kibosh on Rescue Our Children, and said putting some responsibility on their shoulders. And you talk about stepping back, relinquishing control, encouraging parenting for competence, as we've talked about, and allowing some important new self-reliant habits to form. So can you give us some specific tips on what to do to help our children become more self-sufficient or more resilient when mistakes happen, or just being more responsible people?
Right. Well, there's sort of two questions in there. And, the fun thing about the book is that the heart of the book really is in middle school, because I feel like that's a period of time when kids are just screwing up all over the place. And teachers who love teaching middle school get that that's the majority of our job, is helping kids sort of, deal with that and come up with new strategies and stuff like that. So, if parents can let that cycle of learning happen naturally by not rescuing kids, middle school teachers love that. But the book really does start with like preschool all the way through to, high school. And when I was talking to kindergarten teachers, I said, what would you like me to convey to parents about what their kids can do that they don't think that their kids can do, stuff that they really have no idea their children can do. And the kindergarten teachers said, almost to a one, they were like, well, everything. There's so much stuff your kid can do that you don't think your kid can do. So really, that's a good starting place, is to realize that your kid is more, we've sort of skewed expectations, and your kid is actually more competent than you think they are. So wherever it is, whatever it is you think your kid can do, let's err on the side of like 2 steps further than that. Because your kid is actually, the first time I asked my kid to unload the dishwasher, my expectation is that he would do the stuff he could reach.
Right.
But I didn't say that. That was just my expectation. And lo and behold, I came in and he'd figured out a way to use the chair to get up on the counter to put the stuff up in the thing. And that was a shocker to me. I expected less of my child than he expected of himself. And that was a big sort of, I see. This is what we're dealing with. But I think the very first thing you can do is sort of think about that long-term goal thing. Not what's important in this very moment to make life easier for my kid, to, make myself feel better at this moment, but what will I want him to know or her to know in 6 months, in a year? And if that is some sort of task at home, or if that is, remembering how to do something, then just talk about that. Say, I'm a huge fan of transparency with kids. I'm a huge fan of talking about what you're trying to do. And in the same sense, I have to say, overarching over sort of the umbrella over all of this is, oh my gosh, please model for your children positive, adaptive responses to mistakes and failures.
Yes.
We tend to not want our kids to see that we're not perfect, but I have a bit of information for parents. They know.
Yes, they know.
They really do know that we're horribly flawed human beings. So if we could do a little bit more, I always make the analogy of at the dinner table, if you could say something like, oh man, I hit reply all rather than reply on this email today, and I really upset some people, and I'm not sure how I'm going to handle that tomorrow, but I'm going to have to make amends tomorrow. So do you guys have any ideas for what I could do? Or talking about the mistakes that you make and talking about the ways you're going to strategize is one of the most important things we as parents do. We are our kids' first and best teachers. And if we're not talking about our mistakes, and we're not talking about how we deal with them, and we're denying rather than accepting when we make a mistake, our kids hear that, and that's what they learn from us. So
I think that is awesome.
That's the biggest, most important thing. And it's what's so crazy is over and over again, when I talk to parents about this, or when parents ask me questions at speaking engagements, they'll say things like, I got this recently, my children, they're just not big readers. How do I get my kids to read for fun, to read for just, recreation? And I said, well, do you read for fun?
No. Right.
And she looked at me really blankly, and she had to admit that no, she doesn't read for fun.
Right.
So, modeling is number 1. Thinking long-term rather than short-term is number 2. Number 3, thinking about the fact that if we've done our jobs right, if we've been good parents, then our kids are going to evolve to a place where they don't need us to lead them by the nose anymore. And rather than sort of making ourselves feel good in the moment, what's going to make them feel like competent individuals over the long term? Because the reward is so amazing when you see your kid do something that they didn't think that they could do, or that you didn't think they could do. That's like this, incredible moment where it's like the Grinch when your heart swells 1,000 times. It's this incredible thing. So really keeping your eye on the long term. I've written about that. I wrote this article in the New York Times called Parenting Not for the Moment, but for the Long Haul. And honestly, that's the article I get the most response to, because people tell me that it's just a lot easier to parent for that moment, because I think that's how we live these days.
Right.
We tend to live in those moment-to-moment emergencies. But those little moment-to-moment emergencies are not what counts the most. Ask any teacher, would they rather see a perfectly done homework that the parent helped a lot with? Or would they rather see a homework that's halfway done with a little note from the kid explaining which problems they couldn't do?
Right.
Those teachers, they want the imperfect stuff so that they can actually get the information they need in order to be better teachers. So, stop parenting for emergencies, I think, is another big tip.
Love it. Love it. I love what you said about what do I want my kid to know in 6 months or 1 year. That whole parenting for the long haul makes a lot of sense, because it does a little bit let you off the hook in that moment, because it says, you don't have to fix this right now. What do you want your child to learn from this situation? And how great that you can then look at the spill on the floor or forgetting the homework as the perfect lesson for your child to gain the competence to apply to real life situations, not just now, but for the long haul.
We also tend to fixate on some pretty weird stuff. Like, I was talking to a dad recently who's sort of the Waterloo he had with his kid was his kid keeping his room clean. That was the thing that drove the dad crazy and made the kid really frustrated. Turns out this kid was a teenager.
Turns out.
Well, and I said to the dad, so, what's your end game here? What's your goal? Let's step back for a second. Let's not think about the room and how upsetting that is for you that the room is not clean. What is your end game here? And the father said, my end game is that my kid has an organized life, because for some reason we tend to think that if a kid's room is clean, that somehow that magically translates to an organized mind. Turns out that's not true.
Right.
There's a fantastic book called Wired to Create that talks a little bit about how creative people live. In our house, my kids have so little of their world under their control. Their room is one place where they can exert control. And what the dad didn't seem to understand is that this struggle over the room had become a struggle for some little tiny bit of control in this kid's life, because this dad controlled everything in this kid's life. This dad drove the kid everywhere. This dad said what activities this kid would do and what sports this kid would play and what grades this kid would get and what time he'd do his homework and where he'd do his homework. This kid had nothing under his own control. And so I said, maybe we could strike a bargain. Maybe if the kid closes the door and that's just the place where your kid feels like he has a little bit of competence in his life and a little bit of control in his life, you can maybe overlook that one thing and I got an email about 6 months later, and the father said, I didn't realize how that room had become like the symbol of all the things I couldn't control about how my kid grew up. And it made me feel more calm when my kid's room was clean, but it had nothing to do with what my child needed from me. And Beautiful. I also told the dad a little secret that kids who are more controlled and feel like they have no control in their lives lie to us more.
Right.
They're more dishonest with us because they feel the need to sort of carve out control where they can. And so I sort of baited the hook a little, and I said, look, if you let your kid have a little bit of control somewhere, maybe we can do an end run on that lying thing. So he was willing to hear me, from that perspective. But yeah, we tend to focus on some pretty weird stuff.
There's a lot of very good advice, both for that particular father, but I think that also for other people who are listening, they can apply it to any area that we feel like we're trying to exert a ton of control. I know that one of the areas that parents continually ask me about, and something that I'm very committed to asking our guest experts about, is scripting. And I feel like you're really great at that too in your book. But I want to ask you today, your book obviously talks about the gift of failure. And we know that there's a lot of pressures for everyone to succeed. So how do we talk to our kids? If our kid is in front of us, how do we talk to our kid about failing, about making mistakes, dealing with the consequences of those mistakes? If they're sitting in front of you, what would you say?
It's funny you say talk to your kid, because I actually would argue that what we say is a little bit less important than what we show them.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to talk a lot about, we pay lip service to, sweetie, what I really care is that you're learning.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we put the report card on the refrigerator, and we check into the online parent portal on our kids' grades 10 times a day. And we ask them how that French test went the minute they get in the car. So what we're showing them is, okay, yeah, learning, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But I want to know what the grades are. But if we could actually help them understand and really, and the problem is we have to mean it. And there are a lot of parents out there that don't mean this. Like, they really are less interested in learning than they are in the grades. I see it every single time I go out and talk to parents. And that's unfortunate. I mean, I think we're such sort of a grade obsessed, evidence of success, oriented society, that we tend to forget that school is supposed to be about learning, not necessarily about grades. That's why the entire chapter in my book about grades is actually about substituting the idea of goals for grades. So, what we say to our kids when they're right in front of us, I don't know that that's as important as what we show them we mean every single day. And again, it comes back to modeling. And I know it's boring to keep coming back to modeling, because that's not like some actionable item that I can go out and check off on a list right now. But it's an every single day, showing our kids what we value. And if we could get the report cards off of the refrigerator, if we could stop Facebook booking about our kids' grades, if we could stop asking them constantly about the product, if we could get more of our discussion around the process, if we could start, instead of getting all ecstatic over an A and freaking out over an F, and I make the joke when I'm out speaking that F for some parents means a B-, if we could stop freaking out about that and start talking to our kids about what they did to get that grade. What did they try? What did they do? What did they not do? Oh, they say their friend got an A and they got an F. Okay, well, what did their friend do that they didn't do? Have they talked to the teacher about what they did and what they didn't do? If we could start talking about process, keeping our eye on the process and off of the product as much, that would be fantastic. It's become a joke in our house. My older son in particular, he's like, can I just show you my grades, please? Can we talk about my grades? Because in our house, we just don't. I mean, that's not, I've never looked at the parent portal for either of my children. And that's something that gives a lot of parents hives, because we feel like that grade is evidence not only of our children being wonderful, but of our parenting. And I think we need to just get a grip and realize that our children's grades have almost nothing to do with us as human beings. So, yeah.
Let's bring it down to a different issue rather than grades. When you have a child, because you talk about some of the younger kids in this, and that was talking about some of the older ones, say they spilled juice on the floor, you know, or they knock something over and the cereal's everywhere, or the glass broke on the floor, whatever it is.
Right.
In that moment, what is it that you suggest you should do or say that would help to make that child realize that mistakes happen and that we can move on from here without having hysteria?
I'm so guilty of, I'm a very particular person, and I tend to freak out if a kid drops something, especially if a kid, drops something expensive, or if a kid loads the dishwasher the wrong way, and I know that there is going to be goopy food on that plate when it comes out. Those kind of moments, I have to take a deep breath and I have to say, okay, in this moment, I already know my kid feels bad for dropping something. So, how do we handle this? So for me, taking a deep breath and relaxing, and sometimes even just letting my face relax. And I'm not saying you have to treat every spill with a smile and a giggle and, oh, sweetie, look what happened, because that's not real life.
Right.
But as much as possible, especially for kids actually who are more anxious, and that's a problem we're seeing more and more in schools, is that kids are so obsessed with being perfect and not making mistakes that their anxiety levels are going up. So especially for those kids, maybe just take a breath and say, oh, sweetie, what happened? That back to that process conversation.
Right.
Or what do you think we could do now? And there are those moments where this is not an issue. Like there are times when something spills and someone needs to run for a towel fast,
Right.
as opposed to like having a little polite discussion about what just happened. You can deal with the emergency, but at the same point, you can also talk a little bit about sort of what the next step is. Right. And there have been plenty of times where my kid will make a huge mess and start to flip out.
Right.
And it's not really a flip out kind of moment because it's a glass of water.
Exactly.
That kind
it's
of thing.
Water. It's cereal.
Take those moments and say, how can we deal with this? What do you think you should do next?
Right.
Rather than you running for the sponge.
Exactly.
And the other thing is with little kids, learning that I had to deal with this recently with a really little kid. And I was watching her do it. Teaching a kid how to clean up cereal with a sponge is it's really hard because they think you can, just sort of rub it back and forth and
it's
it
a
magically
broom
gets
situation for sure.
It's actually a complex task.
Yes.
And so the more relaxed you are, the more relaxed they're going to be and the more able they're going to be to hear, how to do it differently.
Right.
So, I think a lot of this comes down to, and I totally get that a lot of parents are under time pressures.
Yes, for sure.
We want everything to look perfect and we want everything to go just right. But I said this to my parents recently, I said, please don't give me any of your stuff that you would flip out if it broke. Because I live in a house with kids and stuff gets broken. Right. And I just am not willing to have a lot of stuff in my house that can't get ruined because that kind of stuff happens. And I do it too. I spill things.
Sure. Sure. And the way that we react becomes how they react in many cases. Exactly. And we want to make sure that we stay calm. So we translate that. And then we say, this happens to everyone. I mean, if it's not a big deal, we just need to clean it up. I say to my kids, it's okay to make a mess as long as you clean it up. That's all we ask of you. Yeah. All right.
And the important thing is for us then, if they don't, to not go, oh, okay, well, next time, and then swoop in and do it ourselves.
Right.
Because the problem is all that's telling them is, well, no need to really learn that because it doesn't really mean it.
Exactly. If I complain enough or if I walk away, somebody else will do it. And that is not the lesson. That's certainly not the long haul lesson we want them to learn.
Well, and it's also not their fault. They have these frontal lobes of their brains that are, the bus driver part of the brain that is completely underdeveloped and cause and effect isn't quite clicking yet. And the fact that in 2 hours when they come back downstairs, that crusty plate will still be there. They're incapable sometimes, especially little kids.
Right.
Of realizing that. So it's our job to sort of shore up that frontal lobe for them and help them say, sweetie, if you walk out of the room right now, what do you think is going to happen to that plate? Those kind of conversations over and over and over again are what I think great parenting is all about.
Cause and effect. And I think that's a wonderful way of putting it. So I would love for you to give us the resource of the week. So how can our listeners find out more about you and how you help parents, how you help educators, how you help children succeed in the area of the gift of failure?
Well, the one thing that's really kind of fun is I spend most of my time, especially this time of year, traveling. So I have a really active speaking schedule. So I'm actually on my way to LA next week. I'm all over the place this spring. So if you would like to see me in person, go to jessicalahey.com and look at my speaking schedule. There's also, sort of the articles, under journalism, there's the articles I tend to recommend the most because parents ask me those questions the most. Gift of Failure has a huge bibliography at the end that has a ton of resources. But if you want the amended, the sort of quick version, if you go on my website to speaking and about, there's a downloadable PDF of my the bibliography of the things I talk about, the books and articles and links I talk about the most in my speaking engagements because they're the things people ask about the most. So there's all kinds of things on my website that you can look for.
And where can we listen to you on your podcast?
That has been such a fun thing to do. My podcast is less about parenting, although we do talk about parenting. It's a podcast I host with my former New York Times editor, KJ Dell'Antonia, who actually is in the middle of writing her own parenting book right now that is really fun to listen to her sort of doing the original research for and writing, because our podcast is called Am Writing, #Am Writing with Jess and KJ. And it's about balancing a writing life with being a parent and all that stuff that we have to do. And that's available at iTunes and Audio Boom.
Well, we may have to have her on at some point then.
Her book is going to be great. It's really about not the kind of parents we say we want to be, the kind of parents we aspire to be, but the kind of parents, the way things actually get done.
Absolutely.
The things that we do and the way that we actually do it on a day-to-day basis, and what works and what doesn't.
This sounds like a great person to meet, so she's going to be on my list.
She's pretty fantastic.
So Jessica, thank you so much for joining us for today. You gave us so many really awesome takeaways, some great scripting, some great tips. I really love what you said about parenting for the long haul. I think that's life-changing, just putting that in perspective. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I've got my takeaways, and sweet friends, I know you have yours. Let's discuss them. Come up to Facebook and go to facebook.com/Dr. Robyn Silverman, or let's chat about it at drrobynsilverman.com or twitter.com/Dr. Robyn. Oh, and if you love this podcast like I did, and who wouldn't want to listen to Jessica Lahey all day long talking about this incredible topic, would you kindly go up to iTunes and rate and review it so others will have the opportunity to learn about these outstanding solutions, these scripts, these tips, all the ideas that Jessica brought to the table, and use them in their own homes. I truly appreciate it. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to How to Talk to Kids About Anything. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com. I look forward to weathering the storms and enjoying the sunny side of life together. And please remember, even when nothing is going right, and we all have those days, you've got this. You're here, you're getting this incredible information, and on the days we fall short, never forget there's always tomorrow. Parenting is the ultimate do-over. Thank goodness for that. And as there are moments when we all doubt our know-how, our choices, and our sweet, sweet sanity, please know you're 10 times the parent you think you are. Until next time, this is Dr. Robyn Silverman with How to Talk to Kids About Anything. Please keep connecting through conversation. See you next week.
You've been listening to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com.